Hello YouTube, welcome to my channel. I wanted to talk about editing. So I mentioned in another video that I am writing a book. I started it September 3rd, 2024. I finished it October 19th, 2024. So I wrote my first draft in a little over a month, about a month and a couple weeks. This is not the first time I've written a book. This is probably the 8th book I've written, although this would be the first book I think is good enough to publish. But writing has always been a passion for me, and I think that it would be a disservice for me to not get a book published with all the love and attention and passion I put into what my brother likes to call a time-consuming hobby. I finished writing my first draft in October, and I've been editing it ever since. I demand perfection, and this book is very large. I think in the beginning it was a little over 80,000 words, and it is now almost 160,000. I am trying to slim it down, but it's hard. I've gotten to the point with the editing that I'm not going to make any more big changes structurally to the book. The story is contained and compact and streamlined, and the pacing is good, and everything I think is good in that way. The things I'm working on now are the flow of the wording, the paragraph structure, sentences, redundant words, things like that. Whatever it takes, or whatever it would make it not flow properly, that would kind of remove you from the submersion of the experience of the reading. So if you're reading something and then you come across a word or a phrase or a sentence that's confusing or strange, or they use a weird word to describe a situation, it can really take you out of the experience of the book, and it diminishes the quality and value of that book. So it's very important to make sure that stories flow. And I've learned a lot of things over the years with editing in that way. And I'll never forget when I, as an adult, wrote my first full-length novel. I was about 23, and this was a pretty big book. I still have it, but I finished the book, and I wrote the end, and I thought, okay, I'm going to run this bad boy through spell checker, and then I'm going to go out and Simon and Schuster or whatever, here I come. They're gonna put my book on every shelf. It was just very naive, and I see a lot of people still kind of see writing that way. I've joining some groups on Facebook, creative writing groups, and people will put their stuff in this group and say, "Oh, I love anyone's feedback on my story," and some of it is just abysmal. Like the tensing goes from present tense to past tense and back again, or the dialogue, the formatting is off, and the wording is wrong. The words aren't spelled properly, or the wrong form of the word is used, like the word there. I know that I've gotten to a point that I will never show somebody a first draft. Mind you, it is very hard to get people who are willing to read your book. Even my closest friends who promise to read my book don't read my book. It's difficult. I can't even get people to read the first chapter. And it's not because the book is bad. And if you are in this position, don't take it personally. People just have the best intentions and have the worst follow through. And this is something that I personally strive to not do, because I know how frustrating it can be. And I'm not talking just about committing to read something and never reading it. I'm talking about in all areas of life. If you want to improve yourself as a person, follow through with the things you commit to. I don't think that This seems like a tall order, but it often is. And so the best thing to do as far as editing, and everyone complains about editing who knows the realities of what it is, but the best thing to do is just to structure out a game plan, which I'm sure everybody could tell you. But I wanted to tell you my game plan, and hopefully something I say might be helpful to even a senior writer that is looking for a new approach. I did not base this idea off of anything. This is just kind of what I felt was the best way to do my editing. So it's not structured off of a book on how to edit or a YouTube video I watched on someone's recommendations, which is not to say the things I'm saying may not be similar to something that somebody else is recommending, but I'm not basing it off of anything I've heard. This is uniquely my take on how I approached the editing process. So my style of writing is without outline. I go into the book with a concept and just let my imagination take me where it will, by the grace of God. Amen. I will not change this, even though I know there's a lot of people that recommend to go into a book with an outline because it saves time on editing. I won't change because even if I went into a book with an outline, I think it will change. The outline would change. I've gone into my book, when I was writing it, with the expectation that, I'm thinking I'm going in this direction. This is going to happen. Thinking that in the future. So an outline was already forming as the book was getting typed. But then things changed so many times. This book and its story has taken 1,000 different turns in one direction or another and then shifting back again. I don't think an outline is that beneficial because it cages you in a way, knowing that you have to adhere to this outline of a story that you've already kind of spelled out. And it also takes away some element of fun, I think, because half of the joy of writing is discovering the story that your own mind is giving you. There were parts of this book as I was writing it that I was laughing out loud, that I was shocked. I put the words down and I go, oh my gosh, I can't believe I just wrote that. Like, I can't believe this is what's happening. And there was one specific part that even now makes me cry. I bawled when I wrote it. I cry every time I edit it. But I don't think that these really raw emotional moments can be captured clearly if you're typing and saying, okay, what happens next on my outline? And if that's what works for you, then more power to you. Everyone has a writing style that's different for them. I just don't want those of you out there who like to write in a way to discover the story to be dissuaded by the naysayers that insist an outline is mandatory. That being said, it does indeed require more editing because by the time you get to the end of the book, you have to go back and fix the beginning because you wrote the beginning with no understanding of how the end was going to end. And that's fine to me. I think that they kind of work in a tug of war sort of way. My ending didn't change a whole lot from its original draft, but there are influences of things that I pulled from the beginning when I went back and edited the end, and vice versa. It is okay to jump around. I try to read through from beginning to end, but if I go back and notice a crucial flaw, plot hole, then I will fix it right away so that I'm not trying to remember everything. Or if there's a lot of plot holes, I'll just start writing down, wait, don't forget to change this, don't forget to change this. I did that in the second edit. The first edit, so I did my first draft, and then the first edit, I tied the beginning more to the end, added some elements of foreshadowing, changed the dynamics of things as far as interactions and things like that, try to make it more cohesive and consistent. The second edit is when I started to see some glaring issues, plot holes, and they became kind of numerous, like 10 or so, to the point that I had to write them down because a lot of them I would realize, this doesn't line up with what I'm saying later in my book, but I don't quite remember where that part is. So I'd have to make a note to say, okay, change this when you get to this part, instead of me trying to fish it out and do it right then and there. So those are two options for that. It's okay to go back and change it right away, or to make a list and change it later based on how you do things. But my second edit was more to polish things out, to get rid of all the plot holes, and to just have a solid work from beginning to end, that everything lines up. There's no bumps on the road. Everything is just, it's cohesive. That doesn't mean it has to be written perfectly. That doesn't mean anything like that. It just has to be cohesive. So then you go on to the third edit. The third edit is kind of a jumble for me right now and has changed a little bit from my expectation. Originally, my intention with my third edit was to read everything aloud to myself, read the entire chapter out loud, and then go back and then record it for later, and I'll go into that in a moment. But I mean audio record it, like record myself reading it out loud. But I was finding that I was making a lot of changes just reading. There's a lot of sentence structure issues. I probably could have made my third edit an entire whole just read through of the whole book again, and just to focus on sentence structure issues. But what I ended up doing instead is focusing it on chapter by chapter. So for example, I went back to chapter 1, did a whole through edit correcting the sentence structure issues. Then I went back and read the whole thing again out loud and noticed more issues with cohesiveness, pacing, flow. So I changed it again. And then I went back and recorded it. And while I was recording it, I again corrected a couple issues. While I was recording it audioly, I had a voice recorder. So whenever I say recording it, I mean voice recorder. Whenever I was recording it, there wasn't a lot of issues, but a lot of it was either missed commas or repeated words. Like I'll say around in one sentence and I go to the next sentence, and by the end of the next sentence I say the word around again. So it's too close to repeat the word, that it becomes a glaring. I mean, you can do that. I'm not saying there are times that I feel like it's essential to have a same word repeated more than once, or for artistic sake, it's essential to repeat the same word over and over for the sake of effect. But it's all about the feel of the book and how you want it to be conveyed. And a good way to know your pacing and how a book feels and that you're giving the right vibe with it is to read it aloud. I highly recommend that. It also helps you to detach yourself from your own work, because there are a lot of times that I will read a sentence how it's intended to be written, but when I read it aloud, I realize it's saying form instead of from. It's just one example. So reading it aloud allows me to see where there's glaring issues that I overlooked when I was reading it in my head. So I highly recommend that. I think that the way I'm doing things has been really beneficial because I can hyper focus on each chapter, even though it's grueling. But I've been doing often multiple edits. That first chapter, I did 3 edits on chapter 1. During edit 3, it turned out being 3 edits. Some of the other chapters were 4 or 5 edits. Especially some of the chapters are really long, twice the size of chapter 1. And they required a lot more time, effort, and work. I initially came into February thinking I would finish my third edit by the end of February. And I'm about halfway through because of the amount of work that is still involved in making this book shine. But let me tell you, when I get to the point that I've gone through 4 edits on a chapter and I'm ready to sit down and record it, when I record that chapter, sometimes it takes my breath away to think that this is something I've written, because it's good. It is solid, it flows, it sounds like a book. And I'm to the point now that this book really is starting to feel like a book. but that doesn't mean I'm done editing. So there's two things I want to mention about this. One of the things is that I've found that paper has been beneficial as far as editing. And this might be something I will orchestrate into future projects as a whole edit in itself. My original intention was to go to paper, as in printing the book out near the end. So I'm going to start by talking about that. And then I want to circle back to this edit 3 experience and talk about the paper experience in itself. So past the recording stage, so once I get to the end of the book and I've finished all my recordings, my intention is to spend a weekend and just put my headphones on and listen for as long as I can, like 12 hours a day or whatever, to the entire book as fast as I can. Why am I doing this? I've not done this before, but my cousin has a friend he told me about, a coworker, I think, who told him that he read the Bible cover to cover on 2x speed audio, via audiobook, on 2x speed over the course of 2 weeks. Anyone who's read the Bible knows that is a massive undertaking. I read the Bible every year, and it really does take me all year. It's like 20 minutes a day for an entire year to get through the Bible. So to read it in 2 weeks is pretty remarkable. And by doing that, he noticed a lot of repetition in the words spirit and water. That water is often brought up a lot in the Bible, and so is spirit, and how they work interchangeably with each other, which, I mean, there's so many videos and essays and everything you can imagine out there that talks about the literary exceptionalism, if that's a word, of the Bible. And this is just one more example of that, but I digress. My whole point is this kind of inspired me to think, okay, if I do read my book, I want to read it as quickly as possible so I can see if there is an overarching sense of theme, if the pacing is good, that it's not too slow in places, too fast in other places, and if I'm saying words too much. I am very worried that the word then, THEN, I'm very worried that I've used that particular word too much. I think I'll notice these things when I read the entire book. I'm not going to read it on 2x speed because that'll scramble my brain. But I think I'll notice these repetitive things and the overarching flow more so than I do when I'm just covering it chapter by chapter at a slower pace. So I think that is going to be really beneficial. We'll see. But that's going to be edit 4. So edit 5, 6, and 7 are going to be done all at once. I guess you would call it one edit, but I compartmentalize them as 3 separate edits because it helps me to group them as it were. What I'm going to do with these different edits, I'm going to try to do all at once because I'm going to basically deconstruct my whole novel in a way that I take, my dog's rubbing himself on the floor and sneezing, if you hear that. I'm going to take, for edit 6, I'm going to take my book and pull up different Word documents for every single character in the book, every single character. And I'm just going to go down through the book and copy just the dialogue, nothing else, not he said or she asked, just the dialogue, and paste it in each character document. So my main character A, we'll just say A. Every time A talks, I'm going to take that text and put it in the A document, just as a list, and do that with every single character in the book who has a dialogue. And then I'm going to go back and read down the entire list of dialogue as one thing to make sure that there is a voice in that dialogue. I don't want character A to make a statement that sounds more like character B. Everybody has their own rhythm, repetition, statements, words, mannerisms, inflections. All these things are congruent to the way we speak and how we approach things. I know that my character has different elements of nonverbal approach, but it's the verbal approach that's specific to edit number 5. So I'm going to go through every single dialogue that they say, make sure that they kind of line up with each other, that they're saying the same things. Like if he says it a certain way on one chapter, I want him to say it very similar or the same way in another chapter, to make sure that you know who's talking, even if you don't know, even if it doesn't have a name after it. I think it's very important. It really helps to add color to your character. And I don't know if many people do this. Like I said, I haven't really done any research to see other people's editing strategies, but this one is mine. So I'm going to do that with all the characters, make sure their dialogues all line up, and tweak the dialogue where I see fit based on how they present. So it will not be a read through at that point. I'm just doing deconstruction. I'm not reading through the chapter top to bottom anymore. I feel like by the end of the gargantuan effort of the edit 3, the book should be put together enough that I don't need to read through the chapter anymore. So I'm just deconstructing it like this. So edit number 6 would be character. So with that, I would take out all, in a very similar way, I would take out all the descriptors of every character. So I will do, Control F, find, like type in the character's name, and then just scroll down all wherever that name is mentioned. And if there is any dialogue that describes them, I will paste it into a separate document. So my character A, every description of that character will be in one document. 2 reasons is, one, obviously to make sure that they line up. You don't want, Warrior Cats is infamous for like changing different descriptors on different cats, that their eye color changes, their stripe pattern changes. So it's really good to have a very well described and consistent description of a character. So I'm going to make sure that they all match. But I also want to make sure that every element is in some way described that I feel like is important to describe. Like if I never mention someone's hair color, if they're not a very important character, maybe it's not necessary, but maybe it is. If there's certain qualities that I think really need to be stressed, then I want to make sure that they are dressed enough that it would stand out in the book. So this will allow me the opportunity to go back and add descriptors in areas. And if I do that, then I'm going to have to read at least the paragraph before and after out loud, read the whole thing to make sure the flow is still there. So the dialogue might not be so much of an issue unless I add a lot, but with edit 5, I think the dialogue, it's more just slight tweaks of wording. I don't think you'd have to read through the whole thing again. But anytime you add any amount of substance, more than a sentence, you should probably read at least a couple paragraphs, like a paragraph before and after, read the whole thing out loud to yourself to know that it still has the same flow that you were satisfied with in the gargantuan edit 3, if you do things like I'm doing them. And then edit that. So that's edit number 6. And you can see why I'm kind of doing these all at the same time, because I think it's going to be like that conspiracy theory guy with the strings everywhere. But if I can map this out well enough, I'm hoping that I can make all these copy and pastes at the same time so that I don't have to go through it again and again and again. And maybe I can do it chapter by chapter, but it's going to take however long it takes, honestly. It'd be nice to think it would only take me a month, but it's hard to say. Edit number 7 is environment, atmosphere, however you want to put it. So again, I'm doing the same thing. There's different components of my book that are very prominent, like the landscape, There's two separate landscapes, which I'll go into more when I talk about the paper, the wilderness and the city. So I'm going to have those two as Word documents, wilderness, city. There's also other places that they go. His home, he stays with someone in a cabin, and inside this grand hall place. I want to have that as a document. And then anytime I describe these places, I want to again copy that dialogue and paste it into those separate documents so that I can go back and review them and make sure that the place is consistently described enough, that the descriptions make sense. And I might even ask someone else, hey, if I have you read this, because I assure you, if you want someone to read something, they will be more willing to read 1 page or 2 pages than they would be to read 236 pages. So if you go to somebody and say, if I get you to read these 2 pages, can you tell me if you feel like this place is described well enough for you to picture it? That's a great way to make sure that you are relaying the descriptions that you want for these places that you're trying to create. And this is a good practice for world building, which a lot of people seem to struggle with. I see a lot of comments on these Facebook groups asking how to do world building. I have to let my dog out. He's crying. I don't know if you can hear him, but he's snuffling. So then we get to edit number 8. Edit 8 is, I guess, what you would call the real edit. I'm fortunate to have a very grammatically versed husband who is an English major and knows sentence structure. He's like autistically smart. Well, he's autistic, but he really thrives in concrete structural definition things like mathematics. He's very brilliant with mathematics, statistics. So he's going to do my editing where he's going to read through it from a third person and he's thinking of reading it twice. He's going to read through it as a layman, just reading the book, giving criticism, maybe chapter by chapter, and then overall criticism at the end. And then he's going to read through it and painstakingly edit any of the final issues. Because with so many words, like 160,000 words, you will have spelling errors even after you've read it 100 times. So have a fresh set of eyes is very beneficial. So to have him do this, and this is his preference, but he wants it done on paper. He likes tangibly holding a book. So I'm going to have it printed at Staples. They can actually put it in like a plastic sleeve, like hole punch it, and it's just like putting a cover over it. So it's nice, but it's going to be like a big hunk of paper, and just hand that to him. And he will write down any comments, edits, whatever. It's better to do this near the end as opposed to the beginning, because when you have a lot of editing that needs done, your paper gets really messy. But near the end, there shouldn't be a whole lot of feedback that needs to be put on there. So paper is a good option if they prefer to do, if you have, and this might be a time you can get it professionally edited if you want to expend the cost to do that. So you're better off having it to this point of polished before you get it professionally done, so that the cost of that edit is minimal compared to if you started at edit 3 or at the beginning. And then edit 9, final edit, is going to be the tweaking, correcting anything that needs corrected as far as from that edit 8 feedback, and just one final full read through, start to finish. And that's going to be when it's ready to possibly be published. So I wanted to talk about my experience with paper. And this specifically came about as an issue in chapter 16, because in this chapter, my main character is going from the only thing that up to this point in the book, there's only been desolation, just sparseness, and he is entering into the last place of civilization in this world, at least as far as they know. And so he's going into this experience of entering this place that is completely different from everything that's been world building up to that point. And so there's a huge expose of just explaining the way the place looks, the way the people look, the way they dress, the way they're acting, what's going on in the environment, what the houses look like, what the shops look like, what they're selling, what they're doing. There's so much information. And when I was reading through it, I was making all these changes to the structure. But the more I read, the more I thought, this is a hot mess. And I could tell by reading it, I was jumping all over the place. And so I thought this needs a total overhaul. And the only way I could really do it is to lay the chapter out in front of me, just to visualize the whole thing, because I needed to take all these things and shuffle them around. Like, the dialogue was there, the context was strong, but it just jumped around so much because of all the world building exposition that it wasn't cohesive. It didn't flow. It just was scattered. So I printed it out, and I initially took 4 colored highlighters. This is what worked for me. The 4 highlighters are for the 4 different world building aspects that I was trying to convey. So I was conveying what he sensed, like what he was smelling, what they were doing, their actions, what he was seeing, and the world, the buildings, what the buildings looked like. When I did that, I went in, and the first thing I did with the whole chapter before I wrote anything or edited the actual context of the writing was I just highlighted everything that was in those specific categories. So if you're reading a chapter that needs laid out like this and you realize it's kind of jumbled about, which I came across another chapter that had the same situation, and I practiced the same actions and it worked really well. When there's a lot of things like that going on at once, and it does seem to be jumbled like that, it's so beneficial to just lay it out like this. And I realized, look, if you can see in the colors, how much it jumped from topic to topic. And you can see here, I'm drawing lines because I'm saying, okay, this section needs to go up here. This section needs to go up here. And I started reworking everything. And that's not to say that it doesn't jump around to some extent, and that's fine because he's kind of being bombarded, and I wanted to get that sense, but it was too much. Like, this is one page, here's the other page. It kind of, a lot of the world building is on here, and then it slows down a little bit, and then more focuses on people's actions and what they're doing. But I still had some arrows drawn that I was like restructuring things to just make it go differently and flow differently. I put so much, and you can see, like, this is why you don't do early edits on paper, because of all the scribbling out. I have some that are really extreme. You see all the writing, the re-edits that I've done because of this was an early read through, and I had to like change so much of it. But there's so many ways to do these things, and I'm still learning and growing, but you can find ways to utilize the tools that you know, like separating the dialogue into different Word documents or printing things out and highlighting them so that you can make structural changes. And I'll tell you, when I went back and read chapter 16, it was, I probably put so, like, days of work, hours of work into that chapter. And it was so rewarding because it turned out so cool. And maybe in the years to come, people will watch this video and have my book in their hand and say, yeah, chapter 16 is pretty cool. Anyway, I hope that this enriches somebody, that helps you to grow as a writer. I know that there's so much talent and desire and passion to write. And I think that there's a need for unique voices, because I feel like there's too much of the same thing out on the book market right now. There's too much of the same story told from a different lens. And we need new thoughts and new concepts and new ideas. And if you are writing and you want to write, I mean, you have to have thick skin and accept criticism and grow from criticism. If you only want to hear nice things from people, you should not be a writer. And if you only hear nice things from people, you need to find someone else to get an opinion from. I hope that this was helpful. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.